think today's episode of Catflap Chats is just completely different to anything we've done before. Andries Pretorius played for Cardiff Blues, Worcester, Wales, but just his mindset and his work around business psychology and the brain, and how he deals with setbacks, failures, and how he's transitioned from being an athlete to working in business and helping companies and helping business people perform better was just absolutely fascinating. So completely different type of episode today, but for me, it's up there with one of the best. So I hope you enjoy it too. Cheers. Thanks for coming on to Catflap Chats. So normally, mate, I don't know if you've probably haven't heard any of this, but normally we just have a chat about sort of careers and, you know, funny stories, highs, lows. But the reason I was wanted to get you on was obviously I saw you talk at the Cardiff Blues business event just before lockdown sort of came about and COVID kicked off, really. And I was fascinated by not only what you're doing now in terms of business psychology and that sports transition into business, but also just your mindset and your sort of philosophy, I suppose, on, you know, where you've been and where you've come from, what you've been through, and you were still smiling through the whole thing. So I don't know where you want to start with this, or, you know, normally we kind of start at the beginning and obviously, you know, coming over from South Africa and that journey, or do you want to start on what you're up to now? I'll kind of leave the floor open to you to wow everyone.
No, well, look, I don't have a magic wand to help wow people. I guess the most common thing I keep getting back to me is like when I run the session, so whether it's around digital well-being, whether it's around mental health, right, is that more and more people are recognizing that mental health is not mental illness. Like, I get it. If 1 in 4 people are currently struggling, that's a statistic most of us will know about.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, it's been great that so much attention has been focused on the 1 in 4, right, over the last decade and a half. Right, a lot of attention, raising awareness, breaking stigmas, time to talk, time to change.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay not to be okay. All these things, we've done such a good job at breaking that stigma and changing things. I think we're doing hitting the target, but I think we've been missing the point. Right, and that's the common thing I get back from, because they go, well, what do you mean by that? Well, okay, if 1 in 4 of us are unwell, right, that means 3 out of 4 of us are currently well. And it's not arbitrary. We're doing things that make us well. But
Yeah.
I keep asking myself, like every day when I get up, right, I go, okay, right, what depressants am I going to take today? Well, hang on a minute. What depressants? Like, yeah, that decision whether to go for a walk or to make sure that I'm hydrated, right? If I don't do that, that's like me taking a depressant.
Yeah.
So okay, what are some of the ones I'm taking? So when I go do some physical activity, when I'm prioritizing nutrition, when I'm making sure I'm getting good quality sleep, or make sure that I don't spend too much time on the technology that make me unwell, but instead I spend time on the ones that I enjoy, that give me fulfillment.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, okay, I'm just prioritizing those 3 out of 4 who are currently well. Because when you know why you are well, you're more likely to fix it when you're not. So the problem is we don't have a clear reference point for when we're not well. So yeah, I always got a smile on my face because I know what my reference point is.
It fascinates me, because especially now in today, I suppose, you know, lockdown doesn't help some people. Some people need that interaction with others, and they need to be out and about, and they might feel confined or trapped or lonely. And so to flip the narrative, I suppose, is what you're saying there, to flip the narrative and not focus on that negative, but actually what positive influences can I make decisions on myself, and what am I in control of? That just helps completely turn the problem and look at it in a completely different way. And actually it doesn't become a problem, but maybe an opportunity, I suppose.
Well, that's the good thing that COVID has done, right? So COVID has pushed a reset button for many of us, right? All of a sudden you don't have a commute anymore, right? So you've got that little bit of extra time. Right, yeah. You get to prioritize the family. The common thing is you know what? I actually enjoyed spending time with the kids. Right. Okay. By now they're starting to drive me insane. Right.
Yeah.
They're big open nurseries. Right. Please. I get it. Right. A 3-year-old can't go watch an episode on Netflix just to give you an hour's time to work. I get it. Right. But it has done a couple of interesting things. So even from a neurochemistry point of view, if you look at, say, for example, neurotransmitters, and there's about 12 of them, but if you look at the 4 main ones, right? So endorphins, physical activity, right? Dopamine, it's all about inner drive and getting things done, proactiveness, our reward pathway. Serotonin is that social inclusion you referred to, and oxytocin, notes trust, intimacy, right? So the interesting thing is, if you look at the first couple of weeks of COVID, right? So we go into lockdown, but think back to what things were like then. Everything was about new habits, right? Following Joe Wicks,
Yeah.
meal plans, because there's no toilet paper and pasta in the shops, right? So so everybody was making all these big moves to help prioritize their well-being. And then after about 3-4 weeks, you'll have noticed that inner drive, so that dopamine genetic system, shifted to serotonin, where all of a sudden we're missing the WhatsApp message to say, hey, who's bringing in the milk today, right? The coffee break that we're going to take. So the water cooler conversations, we started missing those. And that's our serotonin system. That's social inclusion. And so all of a sudden, you notice from week 4 to 6 of this whole lockdown, we start shifting towards things that make us feel good and connected to communities, clapping for the NHS, raising funds. All of a sudden, the charity events started coming from week 4 to 6. So the point you make there, yes, for a lot of us, and we all have different sort of baselines of these chemicals and the cocktail that we have,
Yeah.
But the good thing that came from this was that people for a long time have struggled at prioritizing physical activity. And here's the one thing you could go do every day, because you all of a sudden have time, which is go for a walk, take the dog for a walk, do some physical activity. Now, what that does, gives you endorphins. That upregulates all these other things. So if you think about chronic diseases, 3 fundamental factors: poor sleep, which we affected by the amount of screen time we get; poor nutrition, because we go on all these bad diets and we keep eating high processed carbs, right? And then a lack of physical activity. And COVID has given us the opportunity to fix all 3 of those. And if you look at the people who got really poorly because of COVID, right, a lot of them had pre-existing conditions. So it's again chronic conditions, whether it's chronic heart disease, liver disease, right, diabetes. Right. So again, here's a great opportunity for us as a society to push the reset button, to reprioritize our well-being, right? And one of those sits in that community feeling. And all of a sudden, how many more people are having dinner dates, right, using the camera?
Yeah.
Right? Those social groups connected in a way that we never thought was possible. And so again, it's interesting to see how we shift and fluctuate through this. But what I am hoping that we look back at sort of 2020. Yes, it was the COVID one. Yes, it was scary. There will be a big consequence from the sort of work industries, as some literally fall flat and others emerge from this.
Yeah.
Right in a stronger position. I get it. But hopefully it'll be one that we look back and say, hey, if COVID taught us anything, don't let it get to that stage where it's sort of a simmering pot of all these chronic diseases that we have a control over.
It's interesting. I think what you mentioned there, I think about myself specifically, that reset button. And I'm in the office today, but I'm working from home normally, and a 2-bed flat, but there's 3 of us living there, my daughter, my girlfriend and me. So there's not a lot of space. And actually over this sort of last 6 weeks, I've probably been a victim of letting outside influences affect my mental state. And it's got to the point where I've gone, I need a reset. I've never walked as much. I've never cycled as much. I bought my daughter a bike for her birthday beginning of May. So, we cycled from the Bay to Castle Cork last night. She's 7 years old, 16 miles, loved it. And I was buzzing after, love stuff like that. But there was still, you're on about that 1 in 4. I still had that 1 in 4. And for me, I think it was the flat, lovely flat, but too small. So now we're moving house in a couple of weeks, and now all of a sudden I can reset, and I can have a study, and I can work from home properly. And Mia has more space to play in. There's a garden and other things which I'd never thought of before, because I never had to. And COVID now has forced me to go, right, well, your work's fine, your relationships are fine, your daughter's fine, you're all healthy, but there's still something was not quite right. And what are you in control of or not in control of there? And it was my actual environment every day, sat at the table in the kitchen doing work while my daughter's doing her schoolwork. And now I'm excited again to, in 2 weeks, reset that, and then, we can go again. James
talks about this great concept that he says, you rise to the level of your goals, or you fall to the level of your system. Right? So you rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your system. And for many of us, right, what's your system look like? You just mentioned there 5 fundamental factors that affect your environment, right? Well, unfortunately, most of us, when it comes to our well-being, right? Mental health very much fits into that. And so, again, mental health being the positive side, right? It fits into that because when it comes to these sort of things, we'll educate ourselves around signs and symptoms, right? So there's education. And we'll generally wait until it bumps up against something before we allow ourselves to go for intervention, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's reach out for some help, speak to a GP, get antidepressants, whatever the intervention strategy is. But between education and intervention sits prevention. And human systems, we're terrible at prevention, right? Because it's harder to measure. Like education, we can measure how many people pass a certain threshold, right? How many people went on the course, how many certificates do we have to give up? We can measure it. Right? Intervention evokes a certain emotion. If I said to you, look, Mikey, there's a cause out there, let's go do something about it, right? It evokes an emotion. And we can measure the resources, we can see where it went, and we can measure the impact. Measurable creates an emotion. Prevention doesn't do that. Right? So prevention doesn't evoke the same emotion, and it's hard to measure. If I'm going to go do something as simple as flossing, right? What am I preventing? A tooth to fall out? All of them to fall out? I'll never know. So prevention doesn't actually do that. But what works really well is that analogy that you just sort of pushed out there. Once you sit down and you just reflect, just that moment of actually not looking at these things.
Yeah.
Right? And okay, they're good. Technology's not good or bad. It's just whether you leverage it to your advantage or not. But take a moment to look up, to look at your environment, to say, okay, which of these do I need to prioritize? And what are some of the changes I need to make that ultimately helps me go towards where I want to be? And when you do that, okay, you're ultimately doing prevention. And so when you start to prioritize, when you start to look at that, well, when you align those things, you go, okay, well, actually, there's some subtle changes I can make. Sometimes it's an environmental factor that you go, look, I'm not going to be able to do anything about that right now.
Yeah.
But it's a no for now, not a no forever. Right? So I can deal with it. I know where I'm going. And once you prioritize and once you bring that into your focus, well, you all of a sudden realize, actually, okay, these environmental things, they affect what I can do, but not necessarily who I am. I'm still in control of who I am. So that allows you to move from that 1 in 4 back to the 3 and 4. And to go, it's okay to have a bad period. It's fine.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I set myself up to fail all the time so that I can learn something from it. I want to be in a bad space so I can learn from it, but I want that in a controlled environment.
And failure, something I try and talk to with everyone we've had, everyone's been, elite sports level or actors, singers, whatever it might be. In terms of that failure, we'll come on to your previous career, I suppose, in a bit. We've kind of gone the other way around in terms of what you're doing now and then rugby later. But in terms of that failure, how do you pick yourself up from failure? How do you let it affect you now? Or if you don't let it affect you, how do you use it to your advantage? Because I think, especially in the last couple of weeks where things like The Last Dance has come out on Netflix, and then all of a sudden everyone's really interested to see Michael Jordan, and was he a bully or was he just not, he just didn't stand for failure? How far does that go? How does it affect you, and how do you use that to your advantage and moving forward?
Look, I think the challenge is when you look at different sports. So you've got to consider there's a difference between professional and elite sport, right? Professional, it's your occupation. You roll out of bed, you got 5 conditioners waiting to do your physical conditioning for you. You got your physiotherapist there, your osteopath there, your team doctor there, right? You got your nutritionist there, your chef is there, right? So again, it's your occupation, and you got all that facilities versus an elite athlete, right? So I can take my wife who played netball for Wales. While I was a player at the Cardiff Blues, right? I'd roll out of bed, I'd get to the club. At the Vale, the breakfast would be served. We'd go down, we've got a gym with all the equipment, and all the staff are qualified and experienced and trained up to help make sure that I as an athlete develop. And you got all the coaches who make sure that I as a player develop, right? Versus at the same time, she'd roll out of bed at 5 a.m., right, to go to the gym, then work a 9 to 5, and then go to spend the core time after that. And she was preparing for the World Cup. I was just preparing for a game against Connacht. Right, so difference between elite and professional sport. And so I think one of the challenges when you see something like the Last Dance, right? So it is all about those elite behaviors, but you've got to remember that those environmental factors, right, they're different between elite and professional sports.
Yeah.
Sometimes I find it hard when somebody tries to enforce what they can do in professional sport because you have the time to do it on elite coaches, where they've got access to their talent. Maybe Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, and then the weekend, if it's an away game, they get that extra bus trip.
Yeah.
But they want to do all that. It's hard to kind of try and force those things to fit. But look, when it comes to failure, right? the way I got to look at it is that it's an event, not an identity, right? It's just why I say I set myself up to fail. I do silly things just because I like behavioral economics and the psychology of it all. So, coming up with little triggers to trip you up. So I cut, for example, holes in all my right pockets. Right. So if I walk down the street, if I try and put my phone in my right pocket, it drops on the floor. My keys, it's on the floor. But why? Because it's subtle things that remind me, okay, this is frustrating. So when I've got my daughter in my one arm and I've got a backpack and I just need one more pocket, right? You know what that's like, right? Okay. And then I drop the keys. I go, hey, it's fine. Look up. It's just the little triggers like that I go, that's a small failure, a tiny little failure. But it's a habit to go, look up. Put your foot on the ball, take a pause. Yeah. Because the problem is if we don't, then cortisol gets released. Cortisol and norepinephrine gets us to get into the fight or flight state, provides us that tunnel vision. So when it comes to managing failure, for me, it's just like managing stress, right? You choose it whether it's a challenge or a threat, and you can control that. You control the mindset around it. So failure to me, right, is an event. And sometimes I'll want to do it. I'll purposefully want to see if I can fail at something in a safe environment so that I can see what can I learn about my approach. As an athlete, that's harder to do because the stakes are higher. You got to remember in sport, which makes this a very interesting industry, is the person that's going to cost you your job, right? The one who's going to literally take the bread off your table sits right next to you. It's not the coach. It's your teammate. They're fighting for your spot, and yet you will bleed for them. You'll stand shoulder to shoulder. That big lurch will be running at you, and I will dive head first to take the hit for you, right? Knowing that you're going to come and take my spot. It's quite an interesting dynamic. Show me another industry where your biggest competitor happens to be a teammate.
Yeah.
And then, because ultimately every year you've got the academy guys, and they're trying to learn from you. So as a senior player, you're trying to encourage them and give them the life experience. But in the back of your mind, I'm giving you all the tools to wipe me off. Don't take it with me. Right? Now my knee's a bit sore, my shoulder's a bit sore, and I'm going to equip you young buck, to come and take over my spot. Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to chuck it in. That's the beauty about sport,
And why?
So, got to be okay with failure.
And how did you get into this? By where that transition from being the sports athlete professional, who I would suggest many don't think in this your way of thinking, in terms of, I'm going to get up today, I'm going to set myself up to fail because I'll learn from it. Like you said, you roll out of bed, it's all done for you. You've got to put the hard graft in, and it's not just talent, it is more hard work than talent. But how did you get from being rugby player, professional, not fed with a spoon, but helped along the way in terms of your daily routine, and it was a routine, to self-sufficient, completely a different mindset and change of mindset in terms of the way that you approach life and tasks and failure and challenges, or whatever that might be?
I do think that I was a little bit fortunate in this regard. So it's not that I was innately born with something. I know there's the challenge between talent and skill, right? So I wasn't necessarily born with a sort of mindset, but the thing was, for me, I didn't get to sport or professional sport until much later on. I was working up in the northern parts of South Africa. I was a sparky. I'm still qualified sparky.
Yeah.
Working on the mine initially as a labourer, swinging a pickaxe, digging trenches for cabling. So that was the first bit, and then went into the paper mill where I did my trade, climbing pylons and stuff like that. Right. So to do clean conductors and did that sort of stuff. So I had life experience, and then on my 21st.
I was going to say, what age were you then when you were doing that?
So I left school at 15. I was a decent student, and in South Africa it's complex, because in South Africa you don't leave school until you're 18.
Okay.
Right. So you got primary school from like 6 till 13 till 18. You're in high school. Right. So if you've dropped out of high school, you're in a bit of trouble. Right. So but my dad was one of those guys that if somebody showed up to our front door and they said, "Hey, look, this is the newest Hoover. Right. Look, it can suck up a golf ball." Right. My dad will buy like 2 of them. So it was always like that. Right. So my dad started talking to somebody, and they said, "Oh, look, to become an engineer, you don't need to go through school. You can go through a technical route, and the big paper mill, they'll train you up."
Yeah.
And he followed a similar route. So he was like, "You don't need school because you're good with your hands. You're good at problem solving. just keep your head down, work hard, right? Just get you a trade, and eventually you can go through the company will help train you up to become an engineer, just long distance learning.
Were you playing rugby at that time as a kid, going up through school and were there academies in South Africa? Because you're a bit far out from where the provinces are, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I am, but you got to remember at that age, right? So everybody does sport, right? So January, everybody does athletics. If you can't throw, you jump. If you can't jump, you swim. If you can't swim or run, then you stand in the crowd and you cheer because you're a cheerleader, right? But everybody's there, right? You're involved in sports. Sports part of the curriculum. Everybody's involved. So yeah, I played rugby. I played cricket. I played something called korfbal, which is a bit like netball, but it's like a mixed sport.
Okay.
Right? Played all of that, and actually, I was far better at cricket than I was rugby.
Okay.
I was quite a short kid growing up. It wasn't until 15, 16 that I shot up, and I was just decent bowler, batsman. Just loved the cricket side, and rugby was just on the side. Yeah. I played for like the C team for my school at the high school when I was in high school, but I was just a good grafter. Just had a good work engine, so I could do long distance running. Loved that side of thing, the endurance side of it. But rugby was like a bit of a side thing. So then, obviously, working for the mine, you play for the mines team, right? And if I smell deep heat and cigarette smoke together, takes me right back to the mine. That was warming up. That was not the mine, sorry, the paper mill.
Yeah.
But if I think about guys like my dad, right? You walk in there and there's deep heat everywhere, a couple of cigarettes. Right, let's go play a game of rugby. And some of the guys, they can't even run around the field, but they're good for scrummaging. Right? It's like that. And I was just like the whippersnapper that would run around because everybody my age would be playing school rugby.
Yeah.
They'd be playing 8th grade. I'd be playing with the big guys, but it wasn't too bad because these guys couldn't really get around the park too much. My dad kept me in the B team. Then eventually I cracked the A team but again, you're playing a small village against a small village against a small village, and then you go play the big guys like Nelspruit, which is like the big town, and they would just pummel us. Right? So on the odd occasion you play them, but that was basically rugby for me. Then I ended up during one of my holidays. It's a bit complex to talk about the stuff in South Africa around race.
Yeah.
But I get why, for example, they had quota systems put in place because all the artisans were all white guys, right? All the engineers were all white guys. Like that was still a fallout from apartheid. So when I was coming through that system, the paper mill only had a certain allocation for how many white guys they could qualify.
Yeah.
So I actually ran my apprenticeship twice. I graduated top of my class twice at the whole regional colliery, and then you'd go back to your company. I graduated top of the class twice. I did the 24-week course the second time around in just over 8 weeks. Right? And still I couldn't actually qualify. I couldn't get the stamp. And so I took a break, spent some time with my uncle Sofa down in Durban. And it was during that time there, I was actually speaking to one of the local clubs. Had a bit of a trial, didn't quite make it because they said, look, you're super fit, you get everywhere, but you don't really know what to do when you get there. So I went for the trials with the Sharks during their preseason, and they invite people to come and join them, and I kind of talked my way into that. Just walked into Rudolph Charlie's office one day and said, look, can I join the training today? And if I'm no good, just don't give me a nod of the head. If you nod your head, I'll be back tomorrow. If you don't, I won't be here. And he just liked the balls that I had to come up and knock on his office. He's the CEO of the Sharks, right? And said, look, we're doing the testing stuff, jump in. But I knew that day they were doing the bleep test. And I knew that's the one thing I've got is the endurance. So I had big guys like Jock Burtis, AJ Fenter, Brent Russell, Ryan Kinkowski, Keegan Daniels. All these guys were all there. And I wasn't just beating them by a smidge, right? I was literally lapping these guys. I was going for it all out. So all of a sudden, I'm showing up these guys on just the running side of it and knowing that there's no contact. There's no rugby side of it yet. So when the latter stages of preseason came around and so the physical side, that's when they got their own back on me. Right? But I showed up with a positive attitude and just enjoyed the experience. By the end of it, the head coach at the time, Dick Muir, sat me down. He said, look, kid, like your enthusiasm, like what you got. We put you in our academy, but unfortunately you don't have the qualifications. You need your matric. You need to have finished high school to go into our academy because academies there is an academic institute as well as a rugby academy. Okay,
yeah.
So you can't quite join us for that. But we want to keep an eye on you. We'll chuck you with one of the feeder clubs. Go spend some time. We'll keep an eye. And you're young. You're only 20, right? So we'll keep an eye and see how you go. So while I'm at this feeder club, I'm busy fixing their plug sockets and light fittings during the day. And in walks a short Welsh guy called Alan Lewis. And I'm supposed, because my English is good, show him around the club because I'd done a bit of a pre-season with them, right? So I'm showing him around the club. And he says, so what are you doing? And I start having a conversation. And we talk life more than we talk rugby. We talk philosophy, which was fun, right? And he said, look, you know what? You're coming up to sort of 21, but for our university team, you would be great. You know, you watched me train one night. He said, you know what? As a second row, you're a beanpole. You're pretty light. But you know what? For some of our 19, 20-year-olds, to have somebody like you around them the whole time may be really good. So, and they offered me a scholarship to come to the UK to university. I didn't tell them I didn't have the qualifications to study. I literally started filling in the paperwork. I put N3, which is like the technical version of a matric, which doesn't actually correlate. But by the time they realized that, I was already midway through my first year of university. I'd passed every subject. I'd literally grafted. I didn't miss a single lecture. I'd be a pest for the lecturers. I would email them before the class saying, hey, can I get the notes for this lecture? Knowing that they wouldn't have prepared it yet, right? How many people do that? But I'd go to them. I need to, because I'm studying in my second language. I only have a 14-year-old's education in English.
Yeah.
So I needed that just to be able to pass. But they like the attitude, and that's the big thing. You know, when you show people commitment, you show them dedication, you show them the right attitude, people work with you. People will allow you to come down to whatever you need and help you with that level.
And where did that come from? Was that instilled to you from your dad and your family sort of growing up, and that work ethic, and we're not given anything, we have to go and earn it?
I think you naturally get that, and I don't think that's necessarily a South African thing or an even Afrikaans thing. I mean, I know a lot of people up here near the valleys where, you know, you've got good hard work ethic.
Yeah.
You know, people who are, and when you grow up in that culture where you get up at the break of dawn, you go and you graft, and you come home and you get to do the same thing over and over again. So, yeah, that work ethic, I think, gets ingrained in you in that culture, but it's not something necessarily tied to South Africa. It just happens to be the community that you're in.
Yeah.
But the Afrikaans culture is very much that, very respectful. You know, still grew up with a belt in the house. You know, and it wasn't just like our neighbors would give us hidings. If we were playing and we got a bit boisterous, no, Uncle Steve next door would give me a hiding.
Would he? Jesus.
Oh, my dad would work so as well. So, you know, it's that community. Like that's a community raises the children. It's still that sort of feel. So I was fortunate to grow up in that little space. And so have people that just push that ethic through you.
I think a little bit of that is almost missing in today's societies in certain aspects. Maybe not the, you know, the whacking and all that sort of stuff, but there's something in there which I feel is missing, whether it's the disrespect or a lack of respect from certain groups, and not to blanket it, but certain groups in society today, because they know they can get away with it. And I think it makes us a slightly worse generation, and maybe the generation under us that are coming through than before.
I think you have to remember that this generation, so if you look at millennials, for example, so I still fit into that category.
And me, we're the same age.
So you naturally see that shift where our parents all of a sudden had access to more resources than their parents would have had. And so that fight wasn't as hard for the data. Again, that's generalizing, of course.
Yeah.
Right? So what parents started doing is trying to be more protective, you know, because they have the opportunity to be, because they're present. You know, before then, you know, the parents who would have worked long hours and be away from the children for a fair bit, their dads, you know, if I think about my dad that worked shift, I hardly ever saw my dad. Right. So, but when you look at it at what we have nowadays, where parents are more present, you know, we've got more resources now than we've ever had. You know, so part of that, I think, becomes a part of entitlement for this generation, that we've got the access. You know, and also then you look at the way technology, I think, has fundamentally shifted it, because if I want something, I want it now.
Yeah.
I think the biggest shift for us has been that entitlement coupled with impatience.
Yeah.
And that's where that frustration comes from. That's where I think some of the things that we see the acting out. We give millennial Gen Zers a hard time based on the environment they've been growing up in. But look, the reality is, if I say to you, look, do you want to go explore and discover, or search and find? You'll go with search and find every single time. Just give me the information. Just give me the tablet. Just give me the diagnosis, right? unfortunately, that steers us to say, look, I want it now. Everything's been individualized. I
Yeah.
go on Netflix and I have my profile. I go on social media, I have my profile. It's me. Before that, it used to be us. And now it's me. So
It's fascinating.
I think it's more societal thing. So there's some stuff there in behavioral economics and social psychology that steers us towards the individualizing of content and information. So you tie that to the environment where we're processing 5 times more information daily than we did 50 years ago, right? You start looking at, for example, how we process that information, the effects that have on us. Then you kind of get the perfect storm for some of that entitlement that comes from it.
It's interesting, that is. I like that. Take me back then to, so it was at Hartpury. So I was in, although I'm rubbish at rugby, mate, but I was in, I was in Uwick.
I blagged my way.
I did, mate. I've blagged my way through life, 100%. Anyone who knows me that you know will tell you that as well. I was in Uwick, and I remember coming down to Hartpury, and I was one of the cheerleaders on the day. Bust down, few cans, but we I think it was in the semi-final, and it was at Hartpury. And was it the scrum half, or is it Tim Stevenson who played 10?
Timo played 10, yeah. The biggest part.
Yeah, he's a big old lump, wasn't he? Someone hit a drop goal from about 55 metres off the top of a line out. It was a 9 or 10, and it was the last minute of the game, and we lost the game, and you guys won. And we always hated Hartpury, always, no matter what, whether it was, first, seconds, thirds, whatever. Hartpury was the one for us, not Cardiff Uni, because at the time they were rubbish. Swansea were rubbish, although both are good now. Hartpury was the one that we hated.
No, and look, that was mutual all the way through. We would know when you guys are coming. We'd know when we'd come up here. I remember, I think that was a tough one, that semi-final, right? I could imagine would be a tough pill for you to swallow. But I think the year after that, that was the harder one, where we're at Twickenham in the final.
Twickenham, yeah, I was there. Yeah.
We played Loughborough in the final after beating you guys in the semis. We went and played Loughborough in the final, and we did well on that one, won that one. But then the next year, a couple of your older boys had stayed on for an extra year.
Yeah, they did. I think they did PGC or Masters or something like that.
What was it? Yeah, the South African guy, Justin Pakes.
Yeah, Justin, that's it. Yeah, played number 8.
It was that sort of. They were those sort of players who were just hanging on for one more year. And I remember we get into that final. Right, we're into Twickenham. Right, you guys are gonna finally get your revenge. You guys go up something like 27-11 first half. Right, absolutely running away with it. And we come back in that second half and we beat it something like 47-28, something silly. And we scored like 40 points in the second half. Right, and just. It broke my heart watching you guys start off. You go, yes, here we go. And your crowd is going crazy. Our little group over there is pretty quiet. Our fans, they're still there with us. Because you know what the uni guys are like. But you guys came all out. This was going to be the one. And watching that second half as the biggest part of the crowd go dead slowly.
We said bus loads.
Just like peer at them and really start digging into it. Oh,
mate, horrific. It was one of the finals, I think, and I won't name names, but the captain, I think, like a couple of minutes in, stuck the head on someone in a scrum.
Yeah.
It was. It must have been that year then. Red card, 14 players, and then we obviously winning at half time. You're like, oh, they can do it.
Yeah.
And we sent busloads of people. Like half the uni came down.
Yeah.
Funny.
So, no, I still remember. I actually had a conversation with Alan Lewis about that just a couple of weeks ago. A couple of boys that played in that match. So our winger who actually scored a couple of the tries, Pete Swatmans. So he was best man at my wedding, and we were supposed to have his stag do last weekend. And so we ended up doing a virtual stag do with about 27 of us through Zoom. Right? It was good fun, and it ended, and obviously PC here. So it ended like you would imagine it would at the end of the night. And yet, there's nobody around us. Very weird.
Yeah.
You know, you get upside down handstand push-ups and stuff. still happens. So,
Love
but it was all the boys from back that era, so they were still there. You know, so all had come back together. So reminiscing. So that same story was. That's why I knew exactly who actually threw the head then.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? That must have been 14 years ago, something like that. 13, 14 years ago now.
That's the scary thought, yeah.
So, Crazy, mate. So take us back to just on the rugby side then. Obviously, what were you studying in uni at the time? Was it business?
Yeah, so I studied business. It's something that, again, fortunate that when I looked at the prospectus the first time, right, you had a couple of options. You could go Hobby College, obviously, agriculture,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you go agriculture. And so while I grew up on the farm in South Africa, it's not farming, right? It's more small holdings, which here would be the size of a farm.
Okay.
Right, and you've got some antelopes and stuff. So again, I was more that side rather than cattle or dairy. So I wasn't quite a farmer.
Yeah.
So I didn't really want to go into farming, right? Because again, in South Africa, it's not an occupation I wanted. Because that was the thing. I was going to come get a qualification, go back. That was
Okay.
my life. So then I looked at the prospectus, and there was two. You had sports science, and then you had business. And I just kind of thought to myself, well, what do you get with sports science? Like I know now everybody does it, right?
Yeah.
What job do I get with sports science? It's a great course if you want to learn how to problem solve, how to understand and analyze data. So if you want to learn the skill set of studying, right, which is really good for all of us, right? So if you want that side of it, sports science is still a good degree, but show me the jobs. If you're going to use it as a stepping stone to become a physiotherapist, a conditioning coach,
Analyst or something. Yeah.
analysts, all of those, great. But what job do you get with it? So I couldn't quite see the job. So I was like, nah, business, I get. When I saw things like accountancy, global business management, change management, strategic management, I was like, okay, I get what those things are. I can go apply it. Worst case scenario, I go back to the paper mill and I go into the administration side of the company.
Yeah.
Right? But it would at least kick me back there. That's something I can go and do. It would also mean I wouldn't have to be on the tools next to the boiler house.
Sweating.
Yeah. So that's what I did. So business management. And then in that, one of the subjects I quite enjoyed was sports psychology.
Yeah.
But quickly realizing I didn't really want to do sports psychology, but the concept of psychology is one I found interesting. And so when I finished Harbury, came over to the Blues, I wanted to keep studying and just quickly went on the path. And that's where I found that at that stage, Newport University was doing a really interesting course called business psychology. And then obviously Glamorgan and Newport merged and became South Wales University.
Yeah.
And so I went and did my MSc in business psychology through them.
And how did, I'll come up back onto that in a sec. How did that move then from Hartpury? Were you with Gloucester at the time then at all? Because they're obviously the feeder club into Gloucester.
So if you're a Hartpury College player, you're training at the same facilities where Gloucester's first team train. So yeah, that's the link there. And I was in the academy with them. And then the head coach at the time was Dean Ryan, who's now coaching the Dragons. And the forwards coach was Carl Hogg, who's coaching the Ospreys. So I was spending a bit of time with them. Dennis Betts, who's the defense coach head coach for Wigan now. And that was the coaching staff. So I was there, but that was the year that Dean Ryan left. So Brian Redpath was taking over Gloucester. There was a little bit of shifts on contracts for the academy guys. Obviously, you'd be lost. But I also wanted to get out of the uni bubble. I was 24 already, right? Being around 18, 19-year-olds. I've been there, done that.
Yeah, different mindset.
So how I ended up with the Blues was that Mama Mulatika, you'll remember you played against him a couple of times. So his younger brother, Lottie, right? So Lottie was at Hartpury with us. And I'd met Mama a couple of times. And so I basically gave him my playing CV to give to Di Young. And Di obviously just passed it on to Gethin Watts, who was the head of the academy.
Okay.
But I timed it so that Hartpury College was playing the curtain raiser to Cardiff versus Gloucester in the EDF final.
Yeah, okay.
Right, so we played the curtain raiser to that in the EDF Junior Vars against, I think, Clifton from Bristol. So we played that match. I had a couple of good pies for my effort, and afterwards spoke to Gethin Watts at the match. He said, "Look, come and look at the environment." Came up here, and they basically offered me an academy contract, so similar to what I was with Gloucester. But I thought, look, it's small, but for me, I don't have that much, so I packed all my stuff in my little Ford KA, drove up the back way over the M50.
Yeah.
The same kind of taken loads of times to come play against Uwick, drove that way, showed up to the Velomodel KA, and by that December, Di had signed me as a full-time pro.
And what would talk to me about your experience at the Blues and what it gave you, and you know, highlights from there. What you loved about the Blues, what you loved about Cardiff, and why you know, was it 5 years, 6 years you were at the Blues?
Yeah, I was there 5 years. Look, I think the big thing that I take away from the Blues was really interesting. When I got there, you had all the legends, right? You had Martin Williams, Gethin Jenkins, you had your Robinson brothers had just left, right? But you still had Jamie Roberts. You still had all these big name players. Alfie was there, Tom James, Lee Halfpenny. Right? So you had big squad. That's just the backs. I mean, in the forward, you had all these. Bradley Davis was coming through. This young pup that I know he hasn't quite on going to do much, but I think it's like Sam Warburton or something, right? So right, he was there as well. So that was the time. So you get there, you got all of this talent, all of this potential, and we just for one season didn't quite fire with some of that dynamics. Di Young moved on, and then alongside that, they made some significant shifts across the Blues. So all these big name players left, and they replaced them with a group of young lads. So my time at the Blues, I don't necessarily remember because we played fantastic rugby, right? I don't think we ever really achieved what we wanted to achieve, but we were playing against good sides that were just more mature than us. Knew how to close out a game. I think in my fourth season there, it was a challenging one because I think we lost 80% of our games within like a score margin of 5 points, right? So we'd win first half, we'd win 3/4 of the second half and lose it at the end. Young players, right? And you didn't quite have those mentors around these young players. You had guys like Reece Patchell, right, taking over from Dan Parks, right? And you didn't have Pete Lala or Jamie Roberts outside him anymore. You had your young guys, Owen Williams, and those guys outside of him, Harry Robinson outside of him. 10 of the guys who could really mentor and shape these guys. So I think I had to become a bit older very quickly and provide more of a mentorship role.
And because you're obviously later into the game as a pro then, how do you adapt to that? Because you have to almost learn double time in the fact, yes, you might be older, but actually in rugby terms, some of these guys might have played more professional matches than you.
Yeah, that's right. But you'll know something that very few people do because you play that uni rugby. You're playing Wednesday, Saturday.
Yeah.
You're playing catch up really quickly. And the beautiful thing, and this is where I don't quite get the systems here yet, while we haven't tapped into more of that, but I'm seeing a shift in our academies that it's not just about building big athletes anymore. They start to make them more well-rounded as well. But to get them good quality game time, I don't quite understand why we haven't tapped into that education side, because in that space, right, you're playing Wednesdays and Saturdays, and Wednesdays you're playing against the big old fellas from the local club, right? The builders, the brickies, and everybody else that they can convince to come and play a game, right? So it's not as physical. It's not as taxing, right? We're getting good rugby experience there against real men. At the same time, your challenging rugby happens on your Saturday, where you're playing against 22, 23-year-olds.
Yeah.
So actually, there's the impact just isn't as physical as you would the moment you take onto that step up into a program. So for those three years at Harvard College, right, I think in one of the seasons, I think it was something crazy. I think I played something like close to 45 games in one season, right?
Which you wouldn't play now unless you played probably all Prem games, maybe some Cup games, and then internationals on top.
If you get to 25 games in a season, you've done well.
Yeah.
I can honestly say I was never one of the best rugby players at the same time. My time at the Blues, I look back at it and I was very fortunate to get to do what I did. I loved it. I worked hard. But I got, like 50, 55 odd caps. But I was injured for a lot of the time. And 2 of those were just pure fluke. Right, come down over line out, and the ball is just at the wrong time, and I come right down on my ankle, and that keeps me out for a while because of the way that my knee struggled post that as well, right? Or making a tackle, you dislocate your shoulder, that puts you out for best part of 4 months. First session back on the training pitch, I get into a jackal position, and Thomas Young just comes into the jackals and pops the shoulder again. Just the pure fluke of an angle.
Yeah.
So that puts me out for nearly 2 seasons out of those 3 years. Also out of those 5 years, 2 seasons of just rehabbing. feeling like a professional rehabber. Right. So that
How
was
do,
more challenging, I think, than any of the other challenges that you'd get in that environment.
how do you stay positive in that environment where, you know, we've spoken to like Ellis Jenkins and that recently, and obviously, you know, he's coming back through rehab club now. How do you stay positive, and what goals can you set yourself then? Not necessarily be back playing in 4 months or 6 months, but just small ones to just keep yourself so that you're almost not setting yourself up to failure, but you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, look, it's one of those things where I learned this early on, and thankfully, like I say, taking a different route to the professional game, right? People who know me always know I carry a little compass with me, right? The key thing in that is always having a reference point, right? It's just a little token to remind me. And so what that is rugby's what I do. It's not who I am.
Okay.
Right. So in those moments of injury, because I would argue that the hardest bit for you as an elite athlete, as a professional athlete, is dealing with the injuries.
Yeah.
Right. In a physical contact sport like rugby, right, you have guys who work incredibly hard, who've got all the talent and have absolutely what, if you could bottle it, you'd be a billionaire, right? And unfortunately, injuries is part of the game. Long-term injuries, it's just part of that game. And that's where your mettle really gets tested. Because in those first couple of weeks, right, the boys are still there, they feel for you, but they got to move on pretty quickly, right? Because they got a game to play the weekend.
Yeah.
You don't, and you're not intended to anytime soon. You're there, and that's where your physiotherapists are worth their weight in gold. You get the right type of physio, the right type of conditioner, right? As much as these guys have the skill sets and the competencies in developing you as an athlete, as a player, their personal skills are worth its weight in gold. It's one of the big fundamental things that I've seen with what we try to do with the WRPA and getting personal development managers in each club. Having somebody to turn to who says, what are your interests? Right? Not what are you capable of doing, because that's where you keep getting asked. That's as an academy player, they're constantly measuring. How much can you lift? How fast are you? Right?
Yeah.
They've got all those measurables. How do you measure character? That's harder. So they look towards the measurables. So throughout that academy, we're breeding players who are adapted to those measurables. And then when they become a professional and they pick up an injury where they're no longer able to compete and hit those targets, they find themselves with this void, which is, who the heck am I? Right? And so thankfully for me, having a different path meant I always had a reference point in two sides. There's me, the person, and then there's me, the player. Right? So yeah, I didn't always achieve what I wanted to achieve as a player, but I excelled and I achieved way more than I thought I was able to as a person.
And what did you want to achieve that you didn't as a player?
More games. Dude, I was injured a lot.
Yeah.
I just like being on the field with the boys, hitting people, getting hit, you know, testing what you're made of, seeing that move that you've been trying all week, that you saw something, a gap in somebody's game, right? So you notice, I quite like the science side of things. So I always look at the statistics, see where the gaps are. So I'd look at it and go, I think I may have spotted something here, right? Push that in, and then you start practicing and practicing and practicing. And then you're going to get that moment of the game where the stars align, and you're going to see, does it work, right? That front of the line not peel, right, from your own 22, because you notice that they haven't spotted, that they won't be spotting it. It's those moments, right? So for me, I think the biggest regret about the game is just that I was injured, right? I knew that when I'm on the field, I just love being around the guys, being able to sit there covered in sweat and mud, right? And just knowing that you gave it your all. That's the beauty of sport, right? And then afterwards, you get to speak to people, you get to see the fans come up to you, and you have that short period of your life. And it's not about wearing a badge or big accolades or anything like that. But there's a connection there that you can't replicate in any other industry, right? So it's that bit that I regret not being on the field more, because I know I had so much to give. And it wasn't ever about, look, what are my stats, right? I would just happily run at that brick wall, because when I started, I was around guys like Xavier Rush and Andy Powell, Mama Molatika. I mean, these guys would run and get you over the gain line. I was never going to be that. So what I figured out is, there's a brick wall. If I run hard at that brick wall twice, all right, they have to send one or two more reinforcements. Then you've got a Xavier Rush who breaks on the outside, a Casey Loalala who breaks on the outside. The guys who can create the magic. Right? I didn't have the magic. But what I had was a bit of
Graft.
donkey in me that would just run at a brick wall. And be fine with being that. Be fine with the guy that says, look, if I don't make over the gain line once, my stats aren't going to look as good. But I tell you what, that stats is going to show. Here's a guy who's run 20 times at a brick wall.
Yeah.
Fine. I'll do it.
And keeps getting back up. And is that how your Wales caps come about then, in terms of just consistently running through those brick walls for that 2012-13 season?
If I speak to some of my teammates, and I had an interesting conversation with one on the weekend, and he was like saying, look, nah, Andries, you're underselling yourself. You know, you had more than, like, I don't see it like that. You know, don't know whether it's growing up the way I did, but I think the stars aligned that year. It was the Lions. But come on, I had Talupe Faletau, Dan Lydiard, Sam Warburton, and Justin Tipperick. Right? And these guys just weren't injured. They played match after match after match, and they were going and going and going. You had the Six Nations Player of the Year in Dan Lydiard. You had Captain Fantastic Sam Warburton, and you had arguably one of the most skillful back row players in the world who can't get a spot on the team. Yeah. In Justin Tipperick.
And right? I don't think things have changed now. You look at the Wales back row, you know, even at the World Cup, people like Wainwright have obviously stepped up, but then, you know, unfortunately, you know, people like Ellis are injured. When they're all fit, how do you pick from Talupe, Navidi, Ellis, Wainwright? You know, there's several others.
And so at that level, you cannot just have the donkey in you. You cannot just have that sheer work ethic. If it was just about desire, right? Some of the fans would have more desire to run at that wall, right? You got to have the magic. Guys like Ellis, he's got the magic. Guys like Josh, they have that hard work, determination, but they also have that splash of magic, right? So without that, and that's sometimes that magic is what we would probably term talent. Yeah. You know, there's the nature-nurture sort of concept, because they're in an environment that will naturally develop their skill, right? But these guys have the ability to take that one step up, to go beyond that. I don't necessarily believe I had that one step up. But that year, you had half of the squad was with the Lions, right? So you had some of the guys were in the fringes of the Lions as well, so more expedition. Whether I'd have made it to be one of the backups for those guys, right? I think that's probably more suited. No, I was never going to take their spot. I tried. I gave it everything I got, right? I was always going to give it my absolute all, but I was never going to replace one of them, right? But what I could be is help take them up, hopefully, to another level, because when they're on the field, right, in the training sessions, I would be there to let them do what they need to do to develop. Right? That would be me happy. So am I proud of getting those two caps? Absolutely. Do I still remember standing in the Stade de France, right, running out onto that field, and unfortunately being the traveling reserve, when everybody starts singing the national anthem, you go sit back down, right? Incredibly proud moment. I absolutely loved it. It's something I will never, ever forget. Very proud of every single one of the caps I got for the Blues and for Wales. It was such a privilege. But was I ever going to be one of those guys? Nah. And I knew that. And I was happy to understand that, because, again, that would be something I'm doing. It's not who I am. Right? But who I am, that's something I can excel in. And that's something that's for the next 40 years I can work on.
I think that's interesting there. And I don't think every player across any sport, I suppose, maybe even business as well, probably, accepts their role in the team, that this is my role and I'm at one with it. I can strive for better, and I can, like you said, you can push the other players to be better through competition, helping them out, whatever that might be. But I think if more people accepted what their role was and who they were, and were happy with that, but still had goals to strive and develop, I think some people would find it easier to transition, whether that's from sport to business or from team to team, whatever that might be.
I agree. I think one of the main transferable skill sets that an athlete would take into any business is their adaptability to change, right? So that chameleon effect. You're seeing it now through the way that the rugby is changing. You know, gone are the days where you're an 8. You're now a back row player. Gone are the days where you're a center, right? You're a second receiver.
Yeah.
Right. So again, that chameleon is what you need to be. And thankfully, growing up in the culture that I did, going through the experience with this heartbreak, some of the setbacks I had throughout that, you know, very much parts of helps you be the chameleon. I guess the other thing, and it's something that I only mentioned it for the first time last year. It's something that I've never really talked about. And I'm okay. I've always been okay talking about it. But in that second year, so my first year with the Cardiff Blues, I got the Young Player of the Year. The second year, I got the Players Player of the Year, the Fans Player of the Year.
Yeah.
That's the year my mum passed away, and the players would know that's what happened. But not a single one of them, even now, will know that she committed suicide. Right? So, and I was on the phone to her when she did it. So I went back to South Africa, spent a couple of days there. We had a version of a funeral, and I came back and I played in the first game of the season, and we cracked on. Right?
Jesus Christ.
But again, we all deal with these things differently. And so for me, I was fortunate that I was able to take control of the situation and just go, look, this will define who you are. And again, you've got to leverage this, right? Or this is going to become your identity. I knew the moment if I went public with that, right? Back then, right, I'd be asked by every charity, or I'd become the guy who needs to keep talking about it.
Yeah.
Right? And I've got no problem being that and filling that role. Right? But I knew that would take me away from who I'm trying to become as an individual. Forget the rugby, just from who I'd like to be.
Yeah.
But again, I have the positive approach to life, and I want to keep that. So dealing with that. So there's a concept there that you look at, say, for example, rather than post-traumatic trauma, we all know what that is. It's very understanding why, and your brain, in the way that it's wired, actually gets wired through trauma, right? But I needed to early on go through that and know that this is a life-defining moment. So am I going to go the trauma, or am I going to go the growth route? Because by definition, if you have mental illness, you have mental health. Mental trauma, you have mental growth. So I was going to move towards post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic trauma. And so when you have that mindset, you say, look, I've got nothing to lose. That is what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to stand up there. I'm not going to waste the opportunity. But okay, now all of a sudden, if they need you to be a monkey that runs at a wall, I'll be that monkey. If they need you to, because all of a sudden your pride gets shifted off. This chip that we have on our shoulder, all of a sudden, a perspective comes in. It kind of takes us full circle to this thing that whole COVID has done, and helping us press the reset button.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for some of us, you have to get to that point where you experience some form of trauma to really be honest with yourself and make assessments and say, look, who am I going to be through this situation? Going through that, I simply decided I can go down the negative route. I can act out. You know, but I was fortunate enough to know that I've got a good support little network around me. People, if I felt I needed to talk to, then I could.
Yeah.
And I just went hard on that. And that may not be the right approach for everybody, but for me, it was the one that worked.
I think that if you were able to bottle that up and sell it, I think a lot of people would buy that, because people, I completely see where you're coming from, but some people, rightly or wrongly, will have a setback and wallow in it. And whenever there's a situation, you find there's normally a couple of types of people. There's the ones that see the problem. What's the fastest way to the solution? The ethical way. Let's get there. And then there's the others who will sit on the problem 2, 3, 4 days until someone else or something else snaps them out of it. And I think it's those people who've got the ability to snap themselves out of it and get from A through the problem B to C are much happier and able to adapt more in life, I think. I mean, there's probably studies on it. Tell me a little bit about your, obviously, unfortunately, you had a shorter stint with Worcester. So, tell me a little bit about that, but then how that transitioned into your, what we call your business career and what you're doing now. So, through the WRPA and then, what you're doing now.
Worcester was a short stint. It's a shame because I finally got over the shoulder, finally got over the knee. I'm feeling fit. I'm feeling healthy. I'm hungry for rugby. Loving that. I know that I've kind of got, one more contract left. Right? Come on, how many guys get past 31?
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Not when you keep running at brick walls, right? so I was like, okay, look, this is probably going to be my last club that I'll play for. I wanted to go spend some time with Dean Ryan. But when he was at Gloucester, I liked his philosophy and his ability to blend the sports side, the performance side with the culture. But I think he's an incredible tactician when it comes to that. So I wanted to go learn more from him because I was already studying business psychology. I was coming up to my third year already. right? So I'm looking at that sort of things, cultures, how do you do that? Look at high performance. And I started looking at neurochemistry back then. So I started to look at the brain and its plasticity and trying to understand that a bit more. But that was the original time. And working with him and Hoggy and Worcester, having met them before in Gloucester. So I was quite keen to go to that.
Yeah.
Also, you know, the facilities of Worcester, I mean, it is fantastic. You know, you're up there in the Midlands, you know, back to Harbury College sort of area, you know, knew I was going there. So I thought, look, there's a good opportunity. Take my wife, let's go down there. Let's spend the last 3 years of my career there. You know, let's hone in on my skill set as a in business. So finish the master's degree, potentially look at a postgrad in neurochemistry, and then crack on from there.
Yeah.
Showed up for the preseason. Unfortunately, pulled the calf muscle during a warm-up. Within a couple of days, I tore the other calf muscle, then a pec muscle, then a stomach muscle, all in short succession. And so eventually I started noticing these twitches and spasms. They didn't really know what it is. We tried a couple of things, couldn't quite figure out what was going on, and things were getting worse very quickly. Right? So the challenge with something like that in the group environment is you don't tell them, because all of a sudden you get one of the boys will jump to a conclusion, and one did, and so I realized pull back, because one said, "Oh, is that motor neuron disease?" Like, oh,
Chill out, like, yeah.
You look at the symptoms, you go, "Oh, crap! Actually, there may be." So you obviously getting this, and this is just sort of US one of days, and it's just coming up. So you got that sort of situation. So I did not talk about that. So the players just knew, he's unwell, he's in hospital, fine. Right? Didn't have a single visitor over that time. I was okay with it. Right? But we tried everything. But here's where Worcester was great: is they left no stone unturned in trying to seek out specialists. You know, so they were absolutely good. My physio at the time, Brooke Wells, and she was fantastic. The head of the medical, he's not head of medical for Quins. You know, Mike Lancaster, and they did fantastic in what they were able to provide for me, until we eventually got hold of the right neurologist. They found something in my blood, and that was the diagnosis then for neuromyotonia, or as we know, Isaac syndrome. And basically that was it. I knew that the moment I started tearing those second group of muscles, I knew that something big was wrong. So I knew rugby was over. I could put that to bed pretty quickly. I kept trying to train and stuff, but you then quickly start figuring, okay, look, what's my career going to look like post-rugby very quickly? But also tied to that, what's my life going to look like post-rugby?
And because you had already, as you mentioned earlier, rugby doesn't define you. It's your profession, your job, it's part of you, but it doesn't define you. Did that make that transition so much easier because your mindset through your whole life had already been that?
I wouldn't say it made it easier, but it tested it. Right? Because here now, it's easy to say, well, what I do doesn't define me, right? Until I take your ability away to do anything.
Okay.
Right? Then all of a sudden, okay, now you got to stand in front of the mirror, and you got to kind of get that little BS buzzer out and see how many times you want to hit that BS buzzer before you can look yourself properly in the mirror. You know, it's that sort of situation.
Yeah.
Right? So it's easy to say rugby doesn't define who I am. It's what I do. You know, until you take away what you can do. So let me take away your ability to do normal day-to-day things without tearing a muscle, without physically hurting yourself, without having spasms. Right? Let me put you in a situation where, because any muscle can twitch, right? So like your eye that twitches.
Yeah.
So the body twitches 24/7, like all over. But sometimes those twitches become a cramp becomes a spasm to the point where the muscle will tear. But that can be any muscle. So if you're having a conversation and your lips are twitching, or your tongue is spasming, or you're stood in a conversation and your bladder starts twitching, and all of a sudden you're like, am I going to pee myself? Am I not going to pee myself? It's okay. Let's test your whole thing of rugby is what I do. It's not who I am. Now test it. And let me take you away from that support network where you've been around 60 people wearing the same badge, you're committed, you're driven, right? You get a lot of serotonin, right, which upregulates your moods and your sleep from being in those environments. We're seeing it now through COVID. That's the bit that we're missing. Right, let me take you out of that. Let's recalibrate your balance and see how you feel about it. All these lovely quotes you use, are they real? Comes back to something you mentioned before, which is those simple short-term goals. And it's got to be written down. You got to wake up in the morning and say, look, here's the 3 things. I can get everything else wrong, but these 3 things are the non-negotiables for today. But if I don't do these things, I may as well be taking a depressant, right? These are my antidepressants for today. I need to have some sense of purpose. I know that the future can be better than it currently is, right? So I'm working towards that, right? And I got to look after my physical health. What are those 3 things for today? They'll change tomorrow. They can change the next day, but these are the 3 non-negotiables. Do that. Then whether you're laying in a hospital bed for 6 months, worrying what the future may look like, or whether you're actually in an environment now where I get to run businesses and I'm doing really, really well in that, doesn't matter. But those 3 things have never changed.
Do you share your 3 non-negotiables, or are they yours? Life ones might change, but what are your sort of 3 non-negotiables in terms of anyone could adopt or anyone should adopt?
For me, it's the first one is a little bit obvious, and I kind of like playing at it, but it's not rocket science, although it is neuroscience, right? but what's your reference point? I mean, where you're sat right now, point north. Where's north from where you're sat right now?
I think it's that way. I think.
Okay, and we do exactly that when it comes to our mental health. I think a healthy version of me is. I think over that it might be there. I kind of know, and you're not far off. But if you really want to do it, right, just take a piece of paper, sit down, and say, what are my top 5 priorities? Yeah. In a work capacity, so the professional me, put that on the one side of the table. You flip the piece of paper around and you write your name, not your occupation, not the things you do. What are the 5 things that are important to you as an individual? Separate those 2. Separate who you are from what you're doing. Right? What's the biggest void the athletes find when they leave the game is they've tied those 2 together. Yeah. And all I'm saying is have a reference point for both. Why not have a reference point for both? And then you can start playing. Now you can start tapping into the neurochemistry when you start writing it down, because now you're tapping into your genetic system. Your brain loves to see progress work in 3 parts: starting point, progression, and end point. From an anthropological perspective, if Bear Grylls came and he popped you on an island, or 10,000 years ago, you had to go find water, right, for your survival. Every time you take a step towards that goal, subtle-headed dopamine, right, helps you make progress and helps you learn, helps you problem solve, gives you the inner drive, feels good. And then when you finally stand on the ridge and you see the river, right, you go, yes, feels great. When you jump in the river, it even feels better. Our brain likes that. Starting point, progression, end point. So in the same way, when it comes to getting progress in this personal development field, have you written it down? What does that look like? Yeah. And now you can factor in all of your environmental factors where we're different.
That seems so simple as well, but until someone almost lays it out for you.
And believe me, someone will. Someone will eventually. You will sit in a consultant's room. Someone will sit and they'll give you the diagnosis. It may be now, it may be when you're 60, but at some point, somebody's going to sit there. And now we're talking about intervention, aren't we? Not prevention. Now it's intervention. Yeah. Bump up into something, whether it's a relationship and you stand in front of a lawyer who has to look at how we're going to sort this out. You're going to sit down and watch childcare, right? What are we going to do? Whether it's your health, you're going to get that diagnosis and they're going to say, okay, right, now you need to make some life changes. And okay, then 2 things will happen. You'll be glad you did or you'll wish you had. That's the truth for all of us. So when it comes to this, you're right. It's easy. It's simple. I'm going to put it this way. It's simple. It's just not easy.
But so not everyone does it.
No. And it's a question I get asked nearly every single week. I got it asked earlier today. Stress management. Right? So the companies I work with, we go and we look at prevention. We build prevention programs. Yeah. Progressive organizations have realized it's not just about free food and beanbags. Millennials aren't just about that, right? 43% of the workforce now are millennials. Yeah. And they don't want the free food and beanbags anymore. They want more than that. It's about looking after developing them, right? So there's an approach to that. But when I work with these guys around well-being, right, common question comes up: stress management. And the example I use is say, look, okay, Mikey, you're going to become a project manager, right? So there's the project. Here's the outcomes we're looking for. Here's the time scales. Here's the resources available, whether it's the manpower or whether it's the actual logistics resources that you need, right? When you show up on Monday, stick your finger in your mouth, hold it up and go, well, I think today we should maybe do, no, you're going to come up with a plan. Yeah. You're going to come up with a structure, right? You're going to come up with key stages where we're going to just pause and evaluate, are we being effective and what should the next block look like, right? And yet when it comes to stress management, do we wing it or we actually have a plan? We don't, so we wing it.
It's so
The
true.
moment you sit down and
So
just bring
true.
that focus in, that's where the good stuff happens. That's where the magic happens. And guess what? We can all do it. Whether you're very close to an intervention stage, so if you're in the 1 and 4, fine. If you're in the 3 out of 4, just figure out what you're doing right now that's keeping you well. Because when you become the 1 and 4, you'll know how to get out of it.
Class. And where can people then who listen to this, because this is unbelievable, been completely different to any other podcast we've done with sports athletes so far. Where can people find you and the work that you're doing across the businesses in terms of that business strategy, stress management, and just to chat to you and learn more? I've learned more today. I've written some stuff down as we've been going along that I need to do to go home and make sure that I can live a better life.
So, the website I've got is Love Halt Compass One Step North, right? So my company's called One Step North, right? So you can just go to www.onestepnorth.com. Right? As you can see with the setup, I was running a session earlier today, and again, it's a lot of the stuff I'm running is web based. And the good thing is you stand in front of the screen, and it's very similar to me being in the room. But whereas previously I would run session with the senior management staff, now they're realizing actually we can scale that across all our staff. I mean, for Mid and West Wales Fire Services, they've been very proactive. They're a great organization to work with because they have a proactive approach. They have a preventative approach. Their people is something that's really valuable to them. So I think over the last 3-4 weeks, I've taken over 360 people through my optimizing mental well-being. We look at the brain, right? And we reframe this whole concept of mental health to the positive side. Right, to recognize that right now, me and you are both getting serotonin just by the fact that we're talking, that we're engaging, we're making eye contact. Right? We reminisced about the good old days, right? Both of us feel good for it. So of the human animal, what does this human animal, how does it work? How can we hack it? Because by the way, companies have hacked it. Right, so I, for example, look into that to show, and the digital well-being courses. Well, for example, look at how technology is advanced and how we're now spending 6.5 hours a day connected to the internet. How far away are we really from being physically connected to the internet? That may be sooner than you think. Right? So it's a bit of a diverse one. So the science behind sleep, why does the human animal sleep? Why? What does it actually happen when we do? So those are the sort of bedrocks of the stuff around well-being that I run. And what I predominantly do is take insights from business psychology, neuroscience, and talk about it like we have today. Things that are just makes sense. And yes, there's research behind it. Yes, there's sound academic research. And I have some of those conversations with some professors and some consultants who are experts in their field. But what I do is basically use that chameleon effect that I use as a rugby player to be able to adopt that so that people can understand it.
It's amazing. I think I could sit in, it fascinates me. I could sit and chat there. We haven't even touched on your career at WRPA and plenty of other stuff as well. But I appreciate I'm taking quite a bit of your time. So what I'll do is we'll wrap it up there. What I'll do is I'll share all of your links when this goes live, so that people can find you and find the work you're doing, whether that's LinkedIn or social media or whatever. I can't thank you enough for today, mate. Honestly, absolutely amazing, unbelievable. I love it. Hopefully you've enjoyed as well. And that was Andries Pretorius on Catflap Chats, Cardiff Blues, Wales, and all-round good guy by the sounds of things. I think if you're interested in that, definitely go and find him on his socials. We'll tag him in. Big thanks to Tiny Rebel Brewery for providing the beers every episode. So cheers for that. They are always appreciated. I'll get onto the marshmallow one next time. Get on the Stay Puft, definitely. And we'll see you all again next week. Thank you very much.